Hi guys, as I'm sure you could tell by the title of this video, we're going to be taking a look at Tori, who's just been released and announced. If you haven't seen her, she's this streamer by night, convenience store by day kind of character. Don't really know what her kit is going to be, or didn't have many expectations for what her kit was going to be. However, after looking at and taking a look at it now, she does seem to have a pretty insane kit. We'll be going over everything regarding her kit and potential synergies and such. Without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing that we'll take a look at is, well, her little animation. So it is a little bit cute. We've seen this kind of already in game or from our bit of previews, and yeah, this is a pretty cute and exciting and kind of, well, yeah, it's a very cute, exciting looking, or passionate looking skill 3 or skill 2 animation, or rather skill animation in general, I should say. This is also or looks to be attached to the Valentine's Day or some sort of Valentine's Day event, presumably. Of course, I'm just going to wait until they announce everything because I don't want to get anything wrong. And, things like this always kind of get mixed up or changed at the end of the day. But without further ado, let's take a look at Tori and everything that she has. Now, the first thing that you'll see that they've talked about here is her stat line. She's got decently high attack. She's got pretty high speed. And other than that, it's notable that she does have 23 crit chance at base, which is a little bit higher than usual. Now, as we move to the section talking about her imprint, it is nice that she has AoE attack percent, but as with what you'll see with her kit as well, she does have 17% or 16.8% self imprint crit chance that she can activate upon herself. However, attack percent is also noteworthy in case for whatever reason you decide to use that. Now, the first thing and probably the biggest skill that kind of makes Tori stand out is her skill 2. Now, let me move myself or hide myself for a moment so you can read it. But what it reads is that buffs granted to the caster are applied as unbuffable. Ridiculous. Or, sorry, as undispellable, rather. And when attacked, damage that you receive in one attack cannot exceed 51% of max health. And in addition to this, there's also a 20% chance for each buff granted to grant Cascade, and Cascade can only be granted once every 2 turns. Now, this by itself is ridiculous, but in case you were curious or need a refresher on exactly what that means, here we go. We will go to the database, we'll go to Cascade. And bing, bada, boom, this is a fixed damage buff that is applied normally through Sharoon, and we haven't seen it in a minute. However, it's just additional damage that, in my opinion, is, well, pretty ridiculous. Now, of course, just this by itself is not the main selling point of the character. And I would rather say, or I'd rather focus or fixate on, rather, the fact that all the buffs that are granted to the caster specifically are undispellable. Now, if this said that buffs granted by the caster to everyone else is undispellable, I think she would be broken, as we'll see in a moment. But because she obviously herself is going to be, a bit of a spoiler alert, fixated towards dealing damage, it's kind of interesting to see a way to bypass all of the seals or all the unbuffables in the game currently. Now, of course, that isn't to say that she starts the game and is guaranteed to apply buffs, as there is definitely a little bit of counterplay to this. But it is worth noting that if you are able to start the turn or start things off and give the buffs to yourself to begin with, certain debuffs are just, inapplicable, or you aren't able to get rid of these buffs, which is ridiculous. Now, furthermore, having the safe passage or preventing yourself from taking more than 51% of damage in one hit is usually an annoying trigger, not just because it prevents you from, obviously getting nuked by half the cast in the game. It also makes things a bit more complicated if you start to add things like this S2 passive alongside something like Aureus or another barrier. Now, moving along, the next ability that we have here. Very short. It's her skill 3. Now, the thing about the skill 3 is that this is an attack that like not all sorry, I should say this is a non-attack ability that not only grants you attack and speed to all allies, it also gives you an extra turn to the caster. Now this by itself is already ridiculous because I mean, come on, look at this. 3 turn speed buff, and it's also attack increase. Like, what are we talking about here, right? Absolutely ridiculous. Honestly, this is one of the most powerful blow for blow abilities that we have. Obviously, there are other characters that give things like rage, which kind of do or kind of give a baby version of attack and speed buff. But though this is not the most impactful or maybe the most game-changing speed unit in the entire game, attack and speed by itself is not something you should underestimate. And to be honest, if you're able to make use of this, the attack and speed is something that a lot of characters already, like, you know, scale off of, just off the top of the mind, or just off the, you know, off the top of my head. Characters like Sid obviously appreciate this a lot. And though this is a little bit weird because while she's not, or at least from what you will see in a moment, she's not necessarily designed to be an opener since she's only 116 speed. It does feel like giving attack and speed increases to the rest of her teammates in addition to herself makes her quite versatile, or I should say quite worthwhile or quite valuable to a team. Now, you might be thinking to yourself at this point, well, she's 116 speed, and even though all the buffs that she gives herself are, well, you know, undispellable, and while it is nice that she gives attack and speed, like, what exactly is like the value of this character, right? You like attack and speed increase, well, like, guess what, buddy? Like, I can make the entire enemy team slowed, and I can give rage to my team with someone like New Moon, with Emilpolitis. Well, actually, if you take a look here with her skill 1, it reads that you attack the enemy by whipping a ribbon, and it also grants a barrier to the caster for 1 turn, with this scaling proportional to the caster's attack. Now, below this, you'll also see that this has greatly increased the damage dealt and does not trigger a dual attack. However, when the caster is granted Cascade, this does not cost any souls to soul burn. Now, of course, it's a skill 1. You might be thinking to yourself again, and this might not be as impactful as you think it is, because what kind of skill 1 does that much damage until well, if you just take a look just take a look for a moment. Well, obviously, that is quite impactful. 23,000 damage in addition to granting, you know, yourself a pretty sizable barrier, which is undispellable, by the way. Don't forget that part. Undispellable, by the way. This makes this very interesting because, again, now depending on how you play out epicseven, there are, of course, different ways that people like to deal with debuffs or deal with affecting a character, unbuffable or stripping or applying or using non-attacks to remove or disable or strip an enemy so that they are in a more vulnerable position is very common, and that's definitely something that you'll probably see out of people that use characters like New Moon Luna, again, or a lot of the openers, Conqueror Lilius, Angel of Light, etc. However, if for whatever reason you give yourself, well, buffs that are unstrippable, or from what I can understand, I'm assuming it'll work like this, but if you give yourself, well, immunity and it can't be dispelled, this would be pretty insane looking. And as you're seeing right now, her having this huge barrier that is undispellable means that you're forced to actually hit into this enemy, which is obviously crazy because, again, if you are fighting against someone that is, well, if you take Tori, or if you put Tori alongside Aureus characters, it won't be that easy to get rid of this barrier. And furthermore, again, if you decide to bring additional barriers, like every single time that you fight against this thing, it's not even like as if you can strip it or make it so she can't get any buffs, period. You just have to keep hitting into her. Like, God forbid she has skill nullifier, or if she has other buffs that are you know, undispellable. Just in general, the idea that you are unable to, well, strip or unbuffable to remove the effects from a character basically forces you into hitting a character in one specific way, which is something that is very powerful, and is also why characters like Afternoon Soak Flan are so powerful, because mostly the only ways that you can deal with a character like that are through sealing her, or of course running a character that has 100% evasion, and those are pretty much like locked and loaded, like the only ways that you can really deal with someone like that, without getting into more creative or like a very excessive investment kind of solutions. And in this case, this is the same with Tori, where yes, like you may be able to hit Tori and she doesn't have evasion, but every single turn that she attacks, she has this fat, thick barrier. I mean, like literally, you could see like on screen right now, like this is at least what, like I'd say like 30% of her health. So like roughly, again, she can't take more than 51% of her health in terms of damage every single turn. This is like a 3,000 to 4,000, I'd say probably like a 2,000 to 3,000 shield on top of, as you're seeing in the showcase solution or in the showcase example, alongside an Aureus on Roz. And, you know, recently buffed, he also gets like that unconditional barrier in the backline, which again, by the way, cannot be stripped, which is also what we'll go into in a moment. Now, the final thing we need to talk about is her artifact, and this by itself is also pretty crazy, primarily because, as you're seeing right now, she grants herself an increase of 20% attack, but additionally, if you have this at max, there's a 100% chance to grant a barrier equivalent to at the start of battle, it is guaranteed to grant a barrier, but the scaling of said barrier goes up to 100% depending on your level on this artifact, but it lasts for 2 turns. Now, if this doesn't really sound like that big of a deal for other thieves, you might be kind of right. Just having a barrier that scales off attack is kind of whatever, though some people may enjoy the attack. Until you remember, and as you take a look at Tori's kit, or Tori for a moment, if I could ever take a look at her in game for a moment, like obviously Tori being given a barrier at the start of game and it being unbuffable, it being unstrippable and you having to deal with it is pretty ridiculous. Now, there are other things on screen right now that are ridiculous as well, including things like the immunity and the cascade and all the different buffs that she's gaining here. All of these different buffs being unstrippable, and it doesn't matter if someone takes a turn before, well, relatively speaking, it doesn't matter if someone takes a turn after Tori to try and remove these buffs. It doesn't matter. It is just probably the most well-using buff character that we've ever seen. But let's just take a quick moment to talk about, or take a look at, what exactly is demonstrated or showcased through Tori with the combat demo, because again, this is one of the most interesting characters that we've seen, with her being a hybrid, not just between being a DPS, but also being a buffer herself. Now, as you're seeing on screen right now, though, obviously this team is it's a bit interesting. Of course, we've got Adventurer Roz, who is going to be buffed, but we've got like a mid and like the Hua Young coming out here, which is kind of interesting, or very different, I would say. Excuse me. Now, the one thing that I will say is that, like, no matter which way you kind of spin this, it is going to be extremely, extremely nice to have a character that does this much damage to the enemy. I also, side note, really appreciate the buff that they've given to Adventurer Roz, but like, come on, did you guys just see how much damage that was? That was 20,000. That was like 43,000 damage. Obviously, one's like a dual attack, but like, this is a character that has a stupid amount of potential, because this is kind of like she's kind of similar, in my opinion, or feels like, just based off of the showcase, to be a character that looks kind of similar to, characters in the past like Tempest Surin, and just in general, characters that are very ratty, and it feels like it's annoying to deal with, right? But like, as you're seeing right now on screen, like, you know, she's taking like a beating in terms of, or she's getting hit quite a bit on this enemy, or against this enemy team specifically. But as we're seeing right now, like, guess what? You get rid of her or strip her buffs, or you strip her barrier through physical, like actual attacking means. The next turn that she fights, she is obviously going to one-shot whatever she's fighting against and also grant herself a barrier. Now, I do think it would be kind of interesting, or it's going to be a little bit interesting, I'd say, to determine whether or not this is a character who will, potentially end up using something like lifesteal set. But at least for right now, with how versatile it feels like, with how versatile I'd say her damage and her survivability feels right now, this is definitely going to be a character that ends up being added into the repertoire of most characters or into most teams. Interesting to note there as well, her damage when fighting against, I would say, tankier characters, as you saw right there, is not going to like break your brain or, destroy your mind. Though I still think that 8,600 damage against Indomitable Will in Indomitable Will Ilnov is still pretty noteworthy. But as you'll see here in a moment, I mean, this isn't really something that I'd sleep on either. Again, you're still doing something like 18.5 thousand damage against a character like that, which is crazy. But there is something that we should talk about before we go over the insanity of her potential, just because, again, this is like a very versatile unit or a versatile DPS that has some self-protection built into her kit, while also giving herself buffs, while also giving very good value to the team with the attack and speed increases. And that's a reminder that, well, she is an element focused character, or an element having or element considering character. Now, I don't think this necessarily means that Tori is bad by any means, but this is a character that you'll have to, I guess, basically consider, or you'll have to consider her element or consider what exactly her value is, especially because she's not necessarily like an RGB blind character or a Moonlight blind character in that sense. If you are going to be taking her against water units, it will still kind of, you'll still kind of struggle in a sense. And although it is going to be nice, of course, to have a character that is otherwise pretty difficult to fight against, it is worth mentioning, or her element has to be mentioned, especially because, well, in this day and age, like, we've got a lot of element specific domination, but I think this current meta that we have, where everyone is basically fighting or picking young Senya and Mort to fight against everything, is pretty interesting, or pretty, well, I guess pretty good specifically for Tori. Now, in terms of her artifact, I do think that, I'm not sure to what extent you'll necessarily need this artifact specifically. Again, I don't want to say that this artifact is bad by any means, just because for what it seems right now, giving her more and more protection at the start of the game will probably sometimes make the difference between winning or losing. However, just because of the way that it feels like a couple of characters that have been, showcased recently have been pairing, and the way that they've been shown, where like you can full cleanse, or everyone, it feels like nowadays, has a full cleanse, maybe you will or won't need this additional barrier. However, it is again worth mentioning that, again, having this early initial barrier will prevent you from dying in some cases. And beyond that, it's 20% attack increase, which is pretty nice. Now, the final mention or note that I want to have before I go over like my thoughts on the character as a whole is that this artifact isn't like the other, limited artifacts or whatever artifacts where you need to consider the fact that you won't get the max value of the artifact unless if it's, at plus 30. Technically speaking here, if you just have this artifact, you'll have the barrier. The scaling of it obviously will go up or down depending on what level the artifact is, but it is nice that like the chance of a barrier occurring or a chance of a barrier being shown up isn't the case, or the way that they decided to run this artifact, which is otherwise, I think, pretty cool. Now, in terms of my thoughts about Tori, I think she's a pretty cool looking character. If you aren't someone that's looking at meta, honestly, I think she's got a pretty bubbly, pretty cool looking character design in general. I like her artifact, or at least the way it looks. I think it's an interesting artifact in general. However, the real thought, or the real consideration that you should have right now, is whether or not you can even afford the character. And if I'm not mistaken, this should be a limited character. I'll double check on that, and I'll include that in the pin section down below. But from what I understand, a lot of people were saying that she was going to be limited. As of this video,
pretty cool. You should check her out.
Thank you for the follow in the middle of this recording video. Anyways, I think she's cool. She's definitely one of the more self-sustaining DPSs that we've received recently. But as I'm sure you could tell with characters like Afternoon Suk Flan and a Bystander Hua Young, that's kind of the norm at this case. If you're a DPS that's being played in 2025, you'll have to have some sort of mechanic that doesn't let you die. You have to have built-in Aureus or built-in Adamant Shield, something like that. And Tori is no different, while also boasting some pretty good damage. Overall, though, obviously, if you just like the way that she looks, I'd probably pull for her, just because, well, pulling for waifu over meta, that's totally fine. But otherwise, guys, maybe give it a little bit before we pull in a test and, I guess, assess this character. Maybe see her multipliers a little bit before we really say how good this Tori character is. Especially because, although I do think that her doing, 20 some odd thousand damage against a Mort who she's element strong against is pretty impressive. Doing, if you're only going to do something like 15 or more realistically, like 15 to 18,000 damage against some characters, maybe this is someone that you'll need to hold off on or wait till you see their exact multipliers to actually give value to. Otherwise, though, I think the attack and speed increases by themselves alongside the extra turn is pretty impactful, and her buffs are indispellable, guys, right? Like, this is pretty first of its kind, and I think it's an interesting concept. In any case, thanks again for watching, though, guys. Overall, I think I'll probably be pulling for Tori. If you don't end up pulling for Tori, that's okay. We'll see how she pans out and how she performs. In any case, though, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one. Make sure to check out the rest of my socials if you want to check out any content related to epicseven or any content related to me. But yeah, thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.